In life, we all encounter obstacles, and those obstacles come in all different shapes, sizes, and forms. The question is, how do we handle those obstacles? Do we attack them head on, or do we allow them to make us quit? Welcome to the No Quit Living podcast, where we aim to motivate and inspire listeners to never give up on themselves, their dreams, or their goals. We will interview successful people from all walks of life as they share their no-quit stories when they had the choice to give up or give in, but they didn't. We thank you for listening, and we hope to be that jolt of positivity as you go for your greatness. Welcome to episode number 212 of the No Quit Living podcast. I'm your host, Christopher J. Worth, and today's theme of the day is consistency. Our quote of the day comes to us from Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Success isn't always about greatness. It's about consistency. Consistent hard work leads to success. Greatness will come. Today's episode is sponsored by the good people over at West Fair Communications, who publish the Westchester County Business Journal and the Fairfield County Business Journal. These newspapers do a wonderful job in covering all aspects of the business world within two of the most influential markets in the New York metropolitan area. You can also take advantage of their daily news feeds, which keep track on the companies and thought leaders in these important regions. For more information, take a look at www.westfaironline.com. Trust me, once you start reading, you won't quit. I'm very excited to bring you today's episode as we welcome our first NBA guest to the No Quit Living podcast. Standing at 7'4", he also happens to be the tallest guest we've ever had on our show. Mark Eaton was a force on the basketball court, and today he is positively impacting companies and individuals as a professional speaker and author. I hope you enjoy today's episode. Mark, I'd like to welcome you to the No Quit Living podcast.
Thank you, Chris. Great to be here with you today.
I appreciate it. So the first question we ask everybody is, are you ready to bring it today?
I'm ready to bring it. Let's go. Let's get rolling.
So the number one objective of our show is to motivate and inspire listeners to never give up. And I was curious if you have either a no-quit story yourself or perhaps a really challenging time where you were tested and you could have given up or given in, but you didn't.
Oh, plenty of them. I have a rather unusual background in that, yes, I played in the NBA for 12 years, but I actually started out life as an auto mechanic. And didn't play much in high school and went to trade school, actually. And then a junior college coach convinced me to leave my toolbox behind at age 21 and give junior college a try and try basketball all over again. And that was very frustrating to start with initially. And but he continued to work with me. And over a couple of years, I got a little bit better. And I eventually went to UCLA for 2 years and sat on the end of the bench. And it was a very frustrating time for me because I had decided to go for my dream, leave my toolbox behind, give college a try. And the first 2 years went pretty well. And then when I got to UCLA, which I thought was the big time, everything kind of came to a grinding halt. And I was seeing my objective of playing in the NBA or playing professional basketball somewhere just kind of go up in smokes. And the summer between my junior and senior year, all I knew what to do was just to go work out. Like I didn't know what to do next other than just go to the gym. And so I went to the gym, and the gym at UCLA, which had been built in the 1920s, was like this site of NBA All-Star pickup games every afternoon. So all the greatest players in Los Angeles got together there and kind of tested their skills against one another. And the college guys, the NBA guys, all showed up there to play because they were the best games in all of Los Angeles. And so I played in these games every afternoon, and I'm still can't get it figured out. I'm running up and down the court and trying to catch up with these faster players who are much faster than the junior college players I played against, right? And they were playing against NBA talent, Division I talent, and I'm like so far behind running up and down the court, like I can't figure it out. And one afternoon in particular, I'm trying to catch this guard on the other team named Rocket Rod Foster, and he was like the fastest guy I'd ever seen in my life. And he was getting to the basket, I'm barely going across half court, and so I'm standing on the sidelines for a minute. I'm just kind of really feeling down and feeling like this is not working, and I can't figure this game out, and what am I doing out here, and can I really play at this level, and having all these doubts. And I'm kind of bent over holding my shorts, and I feel this big, large hand on my shoulder, and I turn around, and it's Wilt Chamberlain. And Wilt, for those of you who don't know, is probably the single greatest basketball player that ever lived. If you don't believe me, go look up his stats. He had retired from the NBA a few years earlier, and every afternoon would still come down and work out with the young guys. And he put this big mitt on my shoulder, and he spun me around. And he said, first of all, young fella, you are never going to catch that, man. I said, thank you, Wilt. I figured that out on my own. And he said, secondly, and more importantly, it's not your job. And he said, come with me for a minute. And so he took me out on the basketball court, and he positioned me right in front of the basket. He said, you see this basket behind you? He said, your job is to stop players from getting there. Your job is to make them miss their shot, collect the rebound, and throw it up to the guard, let them go down the other end and score it. And your job is to kind of cruise up to half court and see what's going on. He goes, I've been watching you play for the last couple of weeks. And he said, I see the skill you have at defense. He said, this is what you need to concentrate on. And so when Wilt shared that with me, it was this life-changing moment for me in that I understood what I needed to do out on the basketball court. I understood where I fit. I understood what I could be great at. And so I stopped doing all these other things that I wasn't good at. And I instead focused on that one strength that I was good at doing and turned it into a 12-year NBA career. And even though my senior year at UCLA, I didn't play anymore, I still sat on the end of the bench. I kept focused on that one thing and turned it into this big career because it was something I could do better than anybody else. I could block shots. I could stop players from getting there. I could get rebounds. I could help my team win by doing my job. And so that's my one no-quit story of hanging in there and continuing to work out because you never know what's around the next corner or who's going to tap you on the shoulder.
No, I think that's a great story, and I did not know that Wilt story, so I appreciate you sharing that. I have to ask you for a selfish reason, but in your opinion, I know you just touched on it for a second, but who is the greatest basketball player of all time?
Oh, man, that you could talk about that all day long. I mean, if you look at Wilt, and Wilt used to say this because in the 80s, when Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was breaking all these records, and he's an incredible player, but Wilt would always kind of one-up him because he'd come out in the press and say, well, if you're talking about Michael Jordan or Kareem Abdul-Jabbar as being the greatest of all time, I don't know if I would say that because when I played, they had to change the rules of the game because of my impact. So the reason the key in basketball, the area under the basket, the painted area is so wide is because of Wilt Chamberlain. The reason you can't cross the free throw line after you shoot a free throw is because of Wilt Chamberlain. So he makes a great point that, if you were that dominant where they had to change the rules of the game, you've got a pretty good case for being the GOAT, right?
That's a very interesting perspective, and I appreciate you touching that. So why don't you just ask you, if you wouldn't mind just sharing with our listeners what it is you're doing today after your NBA career has finished.
Well, I've done a variety of things since retiring from the NBA about 20 years ago. But of recent, the last 10 years, I've been doing a lot of corporate motivational speaking. And I do a program called The 4 Commitments of a Winning Team. And I take the knowledge that I learned on the basketball court playing team, on a team at the highest level, and I transfer that to business audiences because a lot of people in business use the word, the term, we're a team, without really understanding what it means. And I come from that inside perspective of how to get rid of the internal competition, how to get everybody on the same page, how to help people understand that they truly need to be there for the people around them. And so I speak about 50 or 60 times a year around the country to a wide variety of groups. And that's what I do, The 4 Commitments of a Winning Team.
And that's the same name as your book, correct?
Correct.
And if for our listeners that are interested in finding out a little bit more about the book, what's the best way for them to do so?
Easy to pick up on Amazon. Mark Eaton, The 4 Commitments of a Winning Team.
Awesome. So I wanted to ask you, if you had to define yourself, Mark, but you could only use one word, what would that word be?
Only use one word. Wow. Coachable, I think. It was not always easy. I didn't always like listening to my coaches. I didn't always like hearing what they had to say, but I was always willing to listen. And I think because of that and my ability to look at each situation for what it was and what opportunity it might present, I was willing to take a step forward and try something new. And so I think that's the one word that would define me.
I think it's really key what you said is you didn't always like hearing it. And I think whether you have kids or whether you're being coached today, and it doesn't have to be on a court, it could be in a team setting as far as work or charitable things. But I think the reality is nobody always likes to hear certain things, but they need to hear them. And I think the fact that you're coachable obviously is why you've been so successful both during your career as well as past your career. And having been a successful author, wanted to ask you if you are currently reading something, or perhaps you've read something recently that you'd like to recommend to our listeners.
One of my favorite little books is called Leadership and Self-Deception, written by a group called the Arbinger Group. And I use it a lot in my presentations because they make a clear distinction if you're having a conversation with somebody, especially somebody you work with, across the table from each other versus sitting on the same side of the table and looking at the horizon together. It can make a dramatic difference in the other person's experience of that conversation. And so trying to learn to come alongside other people and have a conversation with them as opposed to telling them what to do, I think is a remarkable aspect of this methodology, and it's called Leadership and Self-Deception is the name of the book.
Is it a new book, or has it been out for a while?
No, it's been out for a while, and it's always not about the newest, latest, greatest thing, right? There's some standby things like that just work, and that's what I'm all about. I'm like, if it's too hard to comprehend or not nuts and bolts, I kind of gloss over looking at it. But something like that where it's very simple, simply laid out, easy to do, easy to implement. That's what I'm all about.
No, I appreciate that. I've not heard of that. That's why I was just curious, and I definitely would we'll put that in the show notes as well. One of the things we often talk about is the word accountability, and I think it's so important for all aspects of life in sports and business. I was curious, what does the word accountability mean to you?
Well, accountability to me is really about execution. Sometimes we think it's the things we have to do, and it's really not about that. It's that in order to move the needle and merely make something happen, you have to be able to execute. And you've got to find out what people really want from you. And so I think it's a combination of that coachability of really checking in and doing it in a smart way of saying, hey, I'm doing this. I've completed that. These are the things that, we talked about me doing. Is there anything else I should be more focused on or anything else I should be doing? Getting that information and then coming back and actually executing it precisely. That's a rare trait anymore. A lot of people are like, oh, yeah, I did a little bit of this, did a little bit of that. That's good enough, whatever. And coming from professional sports background, the precise execution is so important, and it's so important to get the information you need from the key players in your life, whether it's a boss, a customer, a coach, whoever it is, to make sure that you're on the right path. And the other thing that'll happen when you have those conversations, you might find out some things about yourself you didn't know. They might tell you something that they appreciate about you that you'd never thought of before, that could take your whole, like Wilt Chamberlain coming alongside me and say, why are you doing all these other things? Like, you're a good player, but, this one thing is this thing you really need to concentrate on can be life-changing.
It's really key that you said that word execution. We've asked that question well over 100 times, and nobody has used that word before. And I think it's really important because you can't execute something halfway. I think when I define it, I look at it, it's either all in or not. A plan or a program isn't executed halfway, because if it is, it's not executed, it's not completed. So I love that you touched on that word in regards to your definition of accountability.
Well, yeah, and I think it goes beyond like all in. It's sometimes I think it's like, okay, I got to give this 110%. I got to jump all in, and it feels like this big giant elephant. And it really goes back to the one bite at a time. And the people that I've met that are most successful they might have had a great idea or something, but they did it in small, little incremental steps. It's about consistent progress forward and consistent execution. Just like my friend Mark LeBlanc wrote a little book about small business. And it was like, the question he asked is, what 3 things are you going to get done today that you're going to execute no matter what? Something happens at home, or if everything goes off the rails, what 3 things are you going to do today that are actually going to move the needle? And so I think breaking it down into little pieces like that makes it seem achievable.
No, I think that is so key. It's those we call the little wins along the way, and to use a sports analogy, no championship is won in one game. Basketball, obviously 82 games, in baseball 162, in football there's 16. Nobody wins a championship in the first game, and I think I love how you touch on that, because it is all about those little things. And you touched on the word consistency, which I think people overlook in today's day and age.
Yeah, they do, and I think in the era of social media and instant gratification, the message that's lost is that success does not come by the next selfie, right? Success is a series of small steps executed, even with a lot of mistakes along the way, that are going to get you there. And I think that's a message that needs to be told more and more with each passing day.
No, I like how you touch on that, and I think that's the instant gratification with social media. And I think some people use it in amazing ways, but a lot of people just use it to kind of post things out there. But the reality is, no major success story, whether it's sports, business, personal, is accomplished immediately. It's all those little things compounded over a long period of time.
Agreed.
So, assuming the 20-year-old version of yourself would listen, what is the one piece of advice you would like to have given the 20-year-old version of Mark?
Well, I think it relates back to what we just talked about, is that when I started trying to play basketball again at 21, I've been working in an auto shop for 3 years. I mean, my grease under my fingernails, my hands were really tight, my knees were really stiff. I hadn't done anything athletic. I was eating junk food, drinking beer on the weekends, and so I had to transform myself into this guy that resembled an athlete somehow. And the first few months were pretty darn rough. I mean, I was sore all the time, and I'm trying to figure out how to stuff. And I had this coach who was willing to be there for me every single day and help me and show me. But it was really challenging. And so I think that I expected something to happen like really quick. And in retrospect, it did, because over the course of the next year, boy, things really started cooking. But in those first few months, it was like painful. It was, I was getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning and running for 45 minutes before I went to work. And then after work, we'd go to the gym for 2 hours and do a half an hour of footwork and a half an hour of agility drills and a half an hour in the weight room and a half an hour just literally learning how to catch and shoot the basketball. And, and I was like impatient with myself. And so I think that's the one piece of advice I would give my 20-year-old self, is to just be patient. It's, everything comes together in its own time, and that consistent little bits of execution will get you there.
You've touched on that at a few times, and I think that's why you were able to have such a successful NBA career, and obviously why you're successful today is it's the consistency, and it's all those little things compounded day in and day out. And I think it's interesting how you touched on it's getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning and putting in the 45 minutes of running and then doing a full day of work and then spending an additional 2 hours after work. And I think obviously like you said, the first month was pretty brutal. It was probably the second, third, fourth month in when all of a sudden you started seeing those successes. But the only reason you were probably seeing them was because you've been doing them for the prior month, 2 months, 3 months into it.
Yeah, correct. They build on themselves. It's like, okay, this is very difficult to do the first day. The second day, it's still challenging, but it's like starting to get the hang of it a little bit. And a few weeks later, it's like, okay, I can do this. It's still not pretty, but I can execute it. And I think the same thing when I started my speaking business 10 years ago. I started out with an hour-long speech written in a notebook that I would take to the Rotary Club or wherever and just read it. I didn't even have it memorized. But I was willing to take those small steps because I knew that I'd spent 2 years writing it. I knew it was a great presentation, but you have to learn how to deliver it. You can't just stand up there and read a speech for 45 minutes. And so it took time, and it was those little incremental steps. Like, okay, I remember memorizing 5 minutes of it, then 10 minutes of it, then 15 minutes of it, then 20 minutes of it, and finally got the whole thing down. And then from there, I had to learn how to deliver it. It couldn't just be this monotone delivery. You had to really deliver it and sell it, and then you had to learn how to feel it. And if I could feel it on stage, you could feel it in the audience. And so all that stuff took a few years to kind of pull together. And again, it was like you couldn't get impatient. It's like you had to pay your dues. You had to get up in front of another audience and another audience, and a lot of them for free in order to get better. Because if you were going to be an all-star speaker, like an all-star basketball player, it was going to take time. And those, that 10,000 hour rule is a reality.
Now, I just want to ask if you wouldn't mind just touching on that 10,000 hour rule in case any of our listeners are not familiar with it.
Yeah. All right. Now, who's the guy that wrote that book?
I'm not sure off my head.
I know the listeners are probably like, oh, it's so-and-so. You guys are dumb. I don't remember that. But anyway, it's a guy that wrote about the world is flat. Oh my gosh. All right. Well, anyway, the theory behind the book is that it takes 10,000 hours of doing something to truly master it, whether it's playing the violin, a piano, being a professional athlete, whatever it is, that it takes that long to truly hone your skills and really become a master of what you're doing. So again, we get in this society now where everybody wants to just kind of shortchange that. I'm like, oh, I can be a social media star overnight, or I can do this or that. And while those do happen on occasion, by and large, the people that are most successful over the longest period of time have spent the time deep in that one niche, finding that one thing that they're better at than anything else.
You've touched on that a couple of times. It's that one thing, and I think it's why people are so successful is they find, whether somebody mentors them or helps them, but they find that one thing that either they love or they realize they're really good at, and then they just become a master in it. And I love that 10,000 hour rule, whether it's 100% accurate or pretty close to it. The reality is you need to consistently do it all the time. So I wanted to ask you an interesting question. If I had the ability to offer you the opportunity to have dinner with anybody, dead or alive, who would you pick and why?
Oh my gosh. Who would I have dinner with? Anybody I wanted to have dinner with. I'd probably go back and find a grandparent that I never met, that was part of my lineage way back when, and sit down and find out how this whole process started. So I think that would be the most impactful for me personally. Because, we're just a result of all the people that came before us. And yeah, we're taking the life to a new level in our own way. But I think a little bit more of the background information would be helpful. And so that would be my pick.
I think it's always interesting that people touch on different people. And obviously, it's a lot of times it's the people that you didn't know because they did have an obvious impact along the way because you wouldn't be here where you are today. So I think that's really interesting that you touched on that. It might be difficult for you to remember because obviously you've played for many coaches along the way, but I was curious if you have or remember the best advice you ever received. And it could be basketball or it could be life in general.
I think the best advice that I learned probably during the NBA was that you couldn't get too high after a win or too low after a loss. The way to win in the NBA was consistent effort. Like a lot of times you'd play, in college you'd play maybe 2 games a week, right? And so you get all hyped up emotionally and, and there was all the college rah-rah around the game. In the NBA, it's a job. Like you might have 5 games and 7 nights in 5 different cities. And if you have a great game on game 1, and then you kind of go to sleep for the next 3 or 4, like you're not going to be on the team very long. So learning that consistent effort day in and day out is a great skill that has served me well over the long term. And if stuff goes wrong, I'm like, okay, that didn't work. Let's move on to the next thing. And if it goes really well, I'm like, hey, great, that was fun. And I'm really excited about, what happened, but I'm not going to get too high because there's another game tomorrow. So I think trying to keep that even keel and understand that consistent commitment to that perseverance and the daily execution is probably the best advice I ever got.
Now, speaking of your NBA career, I was curious if you have an all-time favorite memory or experience from your 12-year career.
Yes. And before I forget, Malcolm Gladwell wrote that book about the 10,000 hours. That just came to me. A favorite NBA memory, I think looking over my career, there's a couple of them. The first thing that happens when you get a chance to play in an NBA team is you want to know, do I belong, right? Can I really play this game? Can I really play at this level? There's only 400 NBA players in the world. And you're one of them. And so how do I hang? How do I make sure that I'm not just a one and done, or I'm here for 4 months and they cut me? And my rookie season here with the Utah Jazz, we were playing the Dallas Mavericks. And I wasn't starting at the time, but the coach put me in the second quarter for about 5 minutes. And I blocked like 6 shots in 5 minutes. I mean, I was doing my thing. I was in my defensive zone. And I remember after one of the block shots turning and starting to run back up the court, and I glanced over at the coaches on the bench, and they were all nodding at each other. And I'm like, okay, I can do this job. And so that was a real monumental moment for me from the standpoint of, okay, I belong. I can do this. I can hang in this league. I can play with these guys. The second one occurred probably in 1989 when I made the All-Star team. And the All-Star team was comprised of two different components. The starting five are selected by the fans. The remaining 7 players who are on the bench are selected by the coaches. And I was selected by the coaches, which actually meant more to me than being selected by the fans, because it was a stamp of approval for my game that even though I wasn't the greatest scorer, not even the greatest player, but I did one thing really well. I played defense. I created havoc for other teams out on the court. And the coaches recognized that and honored me for that by selecting me to the All-Star game. So that's probably the second one.
No, I think that's remarkable, and I think you did touch on it in the sense that it's the coaches that make the decision, and not that it doesn't mean anything that the fans, make the selections, but when your actual peers and people that coach you or coach against you, I think that says a lot for you. So I wanted to ask you, Mark, what's the best way for our listeners to either connect or follow you?
It's easy to follow me. You can just Google Mark Eaton, and my handle is Mark Eaton, just the words spelled out, MarkEaton, and then 7FT4, 7'4", and that's also my website, 7foot4.com. So it's easy to follow me that way as well. So I'm big on Instagram, pretty good on Twitter, so those are the best places to find me.
I love it how, and for our listeners who didn't maybe pick that up, Mark is 7'4", so that's a pretty cool website. Now, I wanted to ask you, last question, Mark, is if you have any parting words you'd like to leave with our listeners.
I think the parting words are that you're only limited by your own beliefs about yourself, that the opportunities are wide open, and to pay attention to what's going on around you. Don't get yourself in such a rabbit hole that you don't see opportunities that show up every day. And I think opportunities are endless. I don't think they ever go away. It doesn't matter if you don't see them for 2 weeks or 2 years or 20 years. I think they're around you every day, and our ability to kind of step back and observe your life a little bit as opposed to just being locked down in it has been the single, I think, piece of advice that I would give somebody, is just to kind of step back and notice what you're doing, notice where you're going, and are your actions taking you where you want to go? And if not, it's not a bad judgment thing. It's just like change them, start doing something different. And I think and then start paying attention to who comes alongside you and opens other doors for you as you start following that path.
I think that's great advice, and I truly, truly appreciate it. And I would definitely recommend our listeners to connect with you and also check out your social media as well. And I truly appreciate you sharing what you did with us, and thank you for your time today, and hopefully we can connect again soon.
Thank you, Chris. We appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to episode number 212. From his initial no-quit story right up to his parting words, Mark shared some very useful and important information with us today. It wasn't until the age of 21 when Mark gave basketball a second shot with the help and guidance of a junior college coach. However, it wasn't until the summer of his senior year at UCLA, when a conversation with the great Hall of Famer Wilt Chamberlain, that Mark really understood his calling in the game of basketball. Mark touched upon the word execution with his definition of accountability, and I think he absolutely nailed it. Quite a few times on today's episode, Mark stressed the importance of consistency. Whether in basketball, life, or in business, consistency wins. As a professional speaker today, giving about 60 speeches each year, Mark gave quite a bit of backstory on both the idea of 10,000 hours as well as what he did along the way to become a professional speaker. It was those actions consistently over the past 10 years that has led Mark to where he is today. My question to you, what do your actions say about you? Have you spent 10,000 hours perfecting your craft or skill? Are you always looking to become better, improve, or are you just content with where you are today? I challenge you today to be consistent. Mark gave an analogy about eating an elephant, and the way you do it is one bite at a time. So take one bite today and another tomorrow, and soon with consistency, you'll be one step closer towards your greatness. And lastly, to our listeners, thank you. We truly appreciate your time, and we hope our episodes inspire you to keep on attacking life and never giving up. To quote Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, it's always too early to quit.